In this brief podcast, we will deal with the causes of the rebellion. The events of 1857 were unique both in terms of historical precedents and in terms of the socio political sphere as far as India was concerned. India as a region has known foreign invaders more frequently than any other region in world history. The reason for it does not lie in the docility or weakness of the Indo Pak people, but in the peculiar geographical position of India by virtue of being bounded in the north by a vast, inhospitable, and unproductive region which starts from beyond the Indus Valley and stretches far north into the steppes of Central and Eastern Asia. It is an irony of history that East Asian tribes and races forced the West Asian nomads of Mongol and Turk origin to seek their barbaric design for plunder westwards. And these Central Asian people repeatedly invaded India. In the process, these Central and Northeast Asian nomadic people conquered and colonized China also, but also extended their sway in South Asia as well as West Asia. The first important aspect of the whole affair is to broadly analyze the conduct of the races who conquered India. This is a relatively simple exercise starting from the Aryans, Huns, Greeks, etc. The invaders of India can be classified into two broad categories, that is, settlers or plunderers. The settlers were the ones who came to the country, conquered it, and settled here. They can be compared with Normans or Saxons who went to Britain and gradually got assimilated in the country which they had initially conquered. The plunderers were the ones who came like Ghaznavis, Mongols, Nadir Shah, Ahmad Shah Abdali, etc. Looted the country and went back to their country of origin. For those who do not know Indian history, it is important to specify that the first Muslim invaders of India, the Arabs, were settlers and not plunderers. They conquered and annexed a part of India and made it a province of their empire. Mahmud of Ghaznavi was both a plunderer and a settler. Initially, his concentration was on simply acquiring the material wealth which during that age was done by plunder. Subsequently, geographical and logistical factors forced him to also act as part settler, and thus he made present Punjab and frontier a province of his empire. But even then, area east of West Punjab remained his area to be plundered. The Ghori Turks, who were Muslims by religion, were the first Muslim settlers in India east of Indus Valley region. They made Delhi their capital and gradually got assimilated in India. They were followed by various Muslim dynasties of Central Asian or Afghan Pathan origin who may be classified as usurpers. These were freebooters and slaves who gradually rose higher in the king's court and subsequently usurped power through palace coups, revolution, or through civil war. The only exception to these settlers was Tamerlane, who sacked and destroyed Delhi in 1398 and did not establish a dynasty in India. The relevance of discussing only the Muslim invaders of India prior to the British while omitting pre Muslim invaders is simple. In 1857, the subject of this book, people belonging to three religions or three broad groups who were fighting with certain objects, these were the British, the Hindus, and the Muslims. It is in this context that an endeavor is made in these paragraphs to acquaint only the layman reader about the broad mechanics of Indo Pak history. The last settler invaders of India prior to the British were the Mughals. They came to India in 1526. They defeated the then Pathan Muslim king of Delhi at Panipat and established the Mughal dynasty. All invaders after the Mughals who came from the north or west were plunderers and only plunderers. These included Nader Shah and Ahmad Shah Abdali. In justice to Ahmad Shah Abdali, it must be stated that Ahmad Shah Abdali in 1761 did not want to become a settler and establish his dynasty in India, but he failed to do so because his soldiers had rebelled and demanded a return back to Afghanistan. All Muslim invaders who attacked India from the north did not distinguish the Hindus from Muslims and subjected all Indians to indiscriminate looting. For a casual reader of history in this light, the British may also appear as just one of the earlier invaders of India, but it is a fact of history that the British conquest of India was much more complex and subtle than all the previous invasions or colonizations of India. Four features make it different. First, the religion, the third religion factor. Second, the communication factor. Third, the economic factor. And fourth, the organizational factor. India's history prior to Plassey was relatively simple. Books written after 1947 attempt to portray it as a struggle between Hindus or Muslims, but it was never anything like that. But then historians are prisoners of time and the society they live in, at least in the vast majority of cases. Those who endeavor to write history as it happened do so at the risk of their life or loss of social approval or just because they are not bothered or pushed about pleasing the majority. The struggle in India prior to 1757 and even after 1757 was between individuals who were Muslims or Hindus by pure chance and who manipulated their followers or subjects in a certain direction, guided and propelled not by any religious convictions but by personal whims and subjective designs. Religion was just one of their tools, a political expedient, a wartime slogan, a matter of policy. Muslims killed Muslims and Hindus killed Hindus for simple power or for patronage or economic benefit. Hindus killed Hindus for Muslim kings and Muslims killed Muslims for Hindu kings. Everything was mixed, diverse, and complex. Rajput Hindu generals fought for Aurangzeb against the Hindu rebel Shivaji. Aurangzeb preferred to ennoble Maratha Hindus who formed 16.7% of his nobles in the period 1679 to 1707. Then let's say Punjabi Muslims who were not even 2% of Aurangzeb's nobles. Thus, Hindu Rajputs and Hindu Marathas were the bulk of Aurangzeb's nobility, and their number in the period 1679 to 1707 stood at 31.6%. Thus, we see that in the period 1526 and 1707, the India of the Mughals was a state which had opened its doors to the natives, as the British later degradingly referred to the Indians. The British, or who became a force to reckon with in India after 1757, brought a totally new phenomenon to India: slavery and subjugation. An Indian could be a common soldier or a non commissioned officer or a junior commissioned officer, but remained junior or subservient to the junior most British officer, who may have been a cook or son of a cook in Britain. The civil servants, the governors, all ranks and appointments of any consequence were open to only the white man. This was a new experience for the Indians. They had been colonized by the Aryans, the Greeks, the Arabs, the Turks, and the Pathans, but all these people had either plundered them and left, or if they had stayed, they always allowed the native Indians to be a part of the dominant classes. The problem with the British was that they thought that they were very special, whereas India had been conquered even by horse thieves and Central Asian adventurers who could not fight with the Uzbeks. The Indians were surprised and disillusioned, and there grew a feeling in North India that these new invaders were different. If we glance at Indian history between 1757 and 1857, we find hardly any Indian in a respectable official rank or position in the territories governed by the English East India Company. Whereas if we compare this with, let's say, the Mughals, we find that the third Mughal Emperor Akbar, just about 3 decades after his grandfather Babur had established the Mughal Empire in India, was freely employing Indians, both Hindus and Muslims, in all ranks and appointments of his army and civil service. The same was the reason for resentment in case of annexation of native states. It closed all doors of advancement to any Indian in any profession or service. The British were different not because they were racist or fascist, but because of the circumstances in which history had placed them. We will take the first of these, that is the religion factor. Before 1757, all contenders in Indian politics were either Hindus or Muslims, but this was irrelevant because both parties used religion just as one of the means to a personal or political end. Shivaji, later eulogized as a Hindu freedom fighter, was in service of a Muslim state. Aurangzeb's most famous General Jai Singh was a Hindu Rajput. Ahmad Shah Abdali, later on portrayed as a purely Muslim hero, could find no better governor of Muslim majority Lahore than Kabuli Mal, a Hindu. Ranjit Singh, the Sikh hero's most trusted advisors were the Muslim Fakir brothers of Lahore. Now, suddenly, after 1757, the third religion, Christianity, appears on the Indian scenario. The British were Christians by accident, and religion was an insignificant factor in the list of priorities. But the very fact that there was a third religion made the scenario complex. New probabilities and possibilities opened for political leaders, religious thinkers, and all those who held positions of power or patronage. Had the British assimilated like the earlier conquerors, their religion would not have been given much importance. But since their conduct was discriminatory and biased, Christianity also became an issue. The new possibility that Hindus and Muslims could combine against a common enemy provided a good propaganda theme for manipulators. politicians for purpose of political propaganda. This is ironic since Islam and Christianity have many things in common. But even then, between 1757 and 1857, most of the conflicts were between states and groups in which Muslims frequently allied with the British and the British frequently allied with the Hindus or Muslims against other Muslim states or other European powers. In 1857, however, the slogan Hinduism or Islam against Christianity was used in order to rationalize a hatred which had resulted from discriminatory policies of the British used based on racism which had little connection with religion. Thus, we see that conversion to Christianity of the African population in South Africa did not end racism, nor did the same happen in USA till 1960s, and even today religion was not an issue in itself, but the East India Company policy of discrimination made it an issue, and religion in a symbolic sense was used as a slogan by the freedom fighter leaders in 1857. The second factor which made the British different from all other previous invaders was the communication factor. England was many months' journey by sea or overland from India, but the sea communications which the British used were guaranteed and reliable by virtue of British naval mastery established after 1588 and consolidated as a result of a series of naval victories in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. The reliable, guaranteed communications kept the British in touch with the home country. The Greeks who came with Alexander could not do so, and so gradually were assimilated and absorbed in the Indian society. The Mughals could not maintain direct contact with their home country since they themselves had been expelled from the home country by the Uzbeks. The Mughals did employ many men of Turco-Mongol origin, but political expediency and the demand and supply gap both necessitated a nobility drawn from a diverse array of Persian, Afghan, Pathan, and selected Indian background. In the British case, the communication factor made it different. Had the Mughals reached India by sea from a far off island and had good naval commanders like Drake, Rodney, and Nelson, they may have behaved differently. Thus, reliable overseas communications ensured a constant supply of manpower for lower, intermediate, and higher military, civil, and political jobs. Britain at this time was experiencing a population boom, and India was an opportunity for many Britons who may have ended unemployed or in debtor jails had they stayed in Britain. The third factor was the economic factor, created because of trading objectives and the Indian Industrial Revolution. The English East India Company's presence was based on trade between India and Britain, and pure business or economic activity confined to India was not their sole objective. India was a base for raw materials which had to be transported to Britain. This necessitated economic exploitation and discriminatory taxation and commercial regulation. The East India Company, in this respect, was a prisoner of circumstances, and its consequent unpopularity in the Indian populace was regarded by its British directors sitting in London as a necessary evil. In this aspect, the East India Company was a sophisticated version of Mahmud Ghaznavi or Nader Shah or Shevaji or Ahmad Shah Abdali. These honorable gentlemen graced the scene for a short duration and then left. The East India Company was there to stay. The fourth and the most crucial factor which made the British racist and discriminatory and thus different from previous invaders of India was the organizational factor. The Mughals who came to India from Central Asia were exiles or political refugees. The first founder king Babur could not hold his ancestral state Farghana in Central Asia. He crossed the Oxus and went southward into present day Afghanistan, where he established a new kingdom. Subsequently, he came to India, defeated the reigning Pathan Muslim king of Delhi, and then decided to stay on in India. Although he detested India's hot weather, just like the English East India Company's officials later on, Babur was an independent king and there was no board of directors controlling him from Tashkent or Bukhara in Central Asia. He had decided to stay in India, and his descendants never thought, like an Englishman of 19th century, that one day they would go back and live in a palace or a cottage in Central Asia. This was not so because they disliked Central Asia, but because it was not economically viable or safe to go and live there. Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire, despised native Indians just as much as many arrogant officials of the English East India Company, but Babur's descendants had no option but to employ Indians in their army and civil service, keeping in view the dictates of the situation by virtue of logistical, political, and social necessity. The Britishers who came to India in 1757 or in 1847 was not always a racist. Many of them married here, intimately mingled with the Indians, took a deep interest in Indian history, and made very positive contribution in the literary, social, educational, and economic spheres. But all said and done, these Britishers were servants of a company which had its headquarters in London, where all policies pertaining to general operations, legislation, recruitment, etc., were made. Even if they wanted to, they could not follow a policy which was fair and just for the Indian natives. The British Parliament had many Indian lovers in its ranks, but these legislators could not directly interfere with the government of the East India Company. Lord Dalhousie, one of the Governor Generals in India, wanted, for example, to include Indians in the higher government of India, but his wish was overruled by the Court of Directors of the English East India Company. During the discussion while drafting the India Act of 1853 in the British Parliament, a proposal was made to have Indian members in the Viceroy's Legislative Council. This proposal was defeated due to opposition on part of Sir Charles Wood, who stated that no two Indians could be found to represent adequately the diversity of Hindu and Muslim society. There was an element of truth in Charles Wood's argument, but it was just a minute fraction of the truth against the whole argument in favor of having Indian members. Later after 1857, the British by and large accepted it as one of the principal causes of the rebellion of 1857. Sir Syed, writing in post 1857 era, declared exclusion as the principal cause of the rebellion. Lord Macaulay, a man who is very often grossly misunderstood and unjustly criticized in India and Pakistan, was a matter of fact a great advocate of inclusion of Indians in the higher ranks by virtue of allowing them to compete in the open competitive examination. Macaulay had been trying to promote the Indian cause since 1833. He laid the foundation of modern education in India. However, in sum total, the organizational factor was the principal cause of the deep British Indian divide, which led to events which erupted like a volcano in 1857. This discrimination was a major and underlying cause of the rebellion of 1857. It was this discrimination which compelled Indians to think of the British as alien exploiters. It led to exclusion of Indians from the higher legislative and political forums. and thus contributed to evolution of laws which were perceived by the Indians as an attack on the caste and religion. In the next part of the podcast, we will deal with the policy of annexation, and this is one of the small excerpts from my book on 1857 titled Sepoy Rebellion of 1857 Reinterpreted, written in 1998.